What's up everyone, welcome to another episode of Return DevTube. In this episode, I'm going to show to you guys how to create a basic web application using Flask. Flask is what we call a micro framework, which means that it's great for beginners to use to get started on web application development if you haven't yet. So with no further ado, let's get started. A few things first you have to install. First is a coding editor. What I'm going to use is VS Code. I love VS Code because it's powerful. It's a powerful editor to use for anything you want. It's free as well. So to download it, if you haven't, just head over to code.visualstudio.com and then select the download button, and VS Code will be downloading. I won't be downloading it here because I already downloaded it. Next thing is you also need to download Python for your operating system. To do that, you have to download Python because Flask runs on Python. The backend logic is developed in Python. So to download, just head over to python.org if you are a Mac or a Linux user. If you are a Windows user, I recommend for you to go to the Windows Store and to download the latest version. And this video, the latest version as of recording time is Python 3.9. Just download from the Python Software Foundation and you'll be installing Python from there. The reason why I say this is because when I downloaded Python from the website, and I tried to develop a web application, it wasn't working, and I solved it by downloading from the store, which is why I'm recommending my audience to do this as well. That is it in terms of installation. Well, actually, there is one more thing. There is one more thing that you need to download, and this happens after you download VS Code. So once you download VS Code, there's an extension that you need to download, which is an extension for Python. This is specific for VS Code. And I already have it installed, but to install it, just type Python in the extensions search. And the first thing that comes up is Python from Microsoft. You'll head over there and then click install, and you'll be installing the Python extension. Now this is it in terms of installing extensions and actual software. Now we can actually get started on the meat of this video. So in this video, I'm intending to create a basic web application which is designed to tell users about whether or not they're eligible to vote in the United States. If you're 18 or older, we're going to tell the user, yeah, you're registered to vote, go ahead to the polls and vote when it's time. Or if you're not eligible to vote, we're going to tell the web application that, hey, sorry, you're not eligible to vote at this time, but in this many years, you will be eligible to vote. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clone a template from GitHub, where there's a basic template for Flask web applications. You can use this template for any web application you desire to create using Flask, which is a good thing. So what I'm going to do is clone from GitHub. You click on the green button and you press this clipboard to copy. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to be opening my command prompt. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change directory by CDing into my desktop. So this is going to take some time. And I'm in my desktop right now. Now I can clone my repository by doing git clone and the link, just by pasting it. Now I've cloned the repository. Now what I'll do is drag it onto my code editor. The name of this repository is Flask temp, by the way. Oh, it hasn't dragged. I'm going to do this again. There you go. So here, once I dragged, I can see my file structure, which contains these folders and files. I'm gonna point out some of the important files that are considered the backbone or what is important for this Flask web application to run. First thing is we have our templates folder. This is what contains all our HTML templates that gets rendered on the browser. This is what we call our front end. And our static folder is where we choose to store our style sheets, where we instruct which HTML elements to style, and we also have our images folder. This is not necessary, but this is part of the template in case if you want to include any images. There's also this .flask env file. In it is where we instruct the web application to enable debugger while we are developing our application. When our application is under development, it is very helpful to enable the debugger because there will definitely come a time where you will where something in your web application isn't working, and the debugger will be very helpful. In fact, the debugger is like the only thing you can use to figure out what's going wrong. If you weren't enabling debugger, then you wouldn't know what's wrong. So that's in terms of the debug mode. There's also this app.py, which is basically our engine of this Flask web application. This is where we start, where the first thing that Flask goes to, and then in Flask we initialize, and then there's our route section. Here we define our routes and our functions that instruct what our routes will return. And there's also model.py, where we develop our models that we eventually, for the sake of cleanliness, we create this model.py where we develop our models. And what we would do is we would import these models into app.py so that we could use them once we're returning certain templates. And that's pretty much it in terms of the most important files. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and enable my virtual environment. Virtual environments are really helpful and like not interfering with any other Python applications or other applications running within your local computer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first create my env folder. In Windows, this happens by doing Python Python 3-m venv, and then I create my folder env. This creates my folder. And if you were to expand this folder, you'll see that this script tag is important because it contains the text file that instructs the terminal to activate the virtual environment under this project folder. So in order to do that, I will do env / capital S for scripts / activate. Notice that file names and folder names are case sensitive. Activate, and once you see this, you can see that your virtual environment has been activated. Now the next thing is to actually install the Flask module, which is used to actually run the Flask application as a whole. Without this Flask module, you can't be running Flask. So what I'm going to do is do pip3 install Flask. case sensitive notice. Make sure that your Flask is capitalized, capital F. And now, as you can see, my virtual environment is installing Flask, and it's completed. And if I were to do Flask Run, I can head over to this link by pressing Control and then clicking on it. A new tab opens, and I see Hello World. Well, where's this Hello World coming from? Well, it's coming from our app.py, where we instruct the application to return this string. Well, how does this work? I mentioned that there's this route section. We define a route, an endpoint, and under that definition, we define functions where we instruct the web application what to do once you arrive at that route. So we define a function named index. Uh, it's recommended to name your functions which you name your route, and then we return this string, hello world. Now what we do realize is that the debug mode for this is off, meaning that it's not sensing this file where I mentioned to activate the debug uh, mode. Well, how do I activate it? Well, it's actually telling us how to run this line of code, meaning that this module will be enabling this application to sense this line of code. So I'm going to cancel out by pressing Control and C at the same time. And then I'm going to run that code. So pip install python.env, and it's going to install this module. We see that it's successfully installed. Now if I do Flask Run again, we see that debug mode is on. Good news. If I do head over to this tab, I see that it returns hello world. Now, how can I make this so that it actually returns one of my template files? Because as you can see, if I head over to my VS Code, I have this index.html file, but this app has no way of returning this index.html file. So how will I enable my app to do this? Well, if I go to my app.py, I have this import render template that I have uncommented out from my template. What this does is basically it allows Flask to return a template that should be rendered to the browser. Now to make use of this, instead of returning the string, I will do return render dash template. This takes in a string, which is the name of the HTML file that we want rendered. In this case, it's index.html. I save this. It's restarting, and if I reload, we see that this is the index.html is rendered successfully. Great. So now let's move on. Now what I'm going to do next is tweak my index.html so that instead what I'm going to do now is tweak my web application, my index.html, so that it is relevant to my purpose is of developing a vote eligibility determiner. So I'm going to tweak some HTML lines. So here I'm going to change the title of my tab to vote eligibility determiner. I'm going to just say hello, and I'm going to say here Welcome to this vote eligibility determiner. Enter your age to see the results. So I'm also going to modify my form. As you can see, this form includes an input box with the type of text. I'm going to change this name so that it's age. This name attribute will be really important later on. And I'm going to change the placeholder to enter your age. And this submit button will stay. If I save my file and I render my changes, you see, enter your age to see the results. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to okay, now that we have that rendered, we have to figure out how the form is going to handle this information with our backend. And the way this happens is through form methods. There's two methods, get and post. Get receives the data and it gets the data, it's self-explanatory, and posts the data to a specified endpoint. So in order to mention this method, I'm going to go to index.html and I'm going to mention the method equals post. And with this form, I wanted to do something. And what is this doing? I wanted to send information to another route where that route will render the results. And the way to do that is to specify an action attribute. And this action attribute will equal to the route that we want to render our results to. And I haven't created this route yet, but I'm going to name this route /results. And I'm going to head back to my app.py. I actually had to make this new route in the backend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify an app.route results. And I have created my results route. And this results route is going to render my results, like I said before. So I'm going to define results. This takes in no parameters. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to retrieve the age that is sent through the form. How do I do that? Well, I can do age equals, and here is where the name, here's where the age name for the input tag comes into play, as you can see here. So what I'm going to do is first, in order to handle this, I have to actually uncomment this line of code. This handles the requesting of information from our forms in the HTML. So the way to do that is I do request.form, and this request.form is a dictionary, and in this dictionary there's a key called age, and this age refers to the name attribute that I mentioned before from the input tag. And what's important to note is this is currently a string, but I actually want to do some comparisons with the age, so I'm going to convert this into an integer. And now that I've retrieved the age, one more thing, I have to also mention the methods in the backend by doing method equals a list that contains get, comma, posts. This shows this, what this is saying is that this endpoint is going to handle get and post requests in order to arrive at the outcome that I'm going to define at my results function. So now that I have this set up, now I actually have to develop the logic that I'm going to use to actually spit at the user whether or not they're eligible to vote. So how am I going to do that? Here is where my model.py file comes into play. For the sake of code readability, this model.py is where you would be defining all your backend logic that isn't necessarily related to routing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a function named vote eligibility determiner, and this is going to take in an age. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do some comparisons to spit out the result. I'm going to make this function return a boolean where true is yes, the user is eligible, and false where no, the user is not eligible. So what I'm going to say is if age is greater than or equal to 18, and if that is so, return true, meaning that if the user is greater than or equal to 18 years old, then they're eligible to vote in the United States at least. Else, you would return false, meaning no, the user is not eligible. Now, in order to sense this function, sense this model, in my app.py, I will have to import that function. The way I do that is I say from model model meaning this model.py, and I import this function vote eligibility determiner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that result into another variable. So I'm going to save this into a variable named eligible. I'm going to set this equal to vote eligibility determiner parentheses age. This age comes from this age I've defined here. So once I have defined this variable, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the render template of an HTML file that I'm going to name results.html. I haven't done that yet. So let's do that now. Open new file, results.html. Let's go ahead and add the boilerplate. So the way to do that is you just type HTML, and I'm going to render the HTML5 boilerplate. There we go. I'm going to name my tab to results, and that's in terms of modifying the boilerplate for now. Now the next thing I'm going to do is if I head over to app.py, there is one more thing that we need to do. This is really important. How do we have the web application to send this data that we retrieved back to the front end? Why do I want to send this information? Well, because okay, now what I want to do is based on this boolean that I have created, I want to do some logic where I spit out different information based on the result that comes from this Boolean. So what I'm going to say is if eligible, meaning if the user is eligible, I'm going to define a message variable which is equal to you are eligible to vote. Head over to the polls when it's, well, actually I want to say register now. Go register now. All right. Now, what if the user is not eligible? I say else message is equal to sorry, not eligible. And if I want to be a little more informative and say how many years left the how many years does the user have to wait in order to become eligible to vote? So I could say you have, and I'm going to concatenate my string by adding the plus, and I'm going to add 18 minus the current age of the user. This is the difference that I'm talking about that the user has to wait in order to be eligible to vote. And I'm going to say space years left to wait in order to be eligible. Done. Now I have this message variable, but what am I going to do with this message variable? Well, I receive this information from the backend and I manipulate it by creating a message variable. Now I want to send this message variable to the front end. And I'm going to use this variable to render the message on my results.html file. How do I do that? Well, what I can do is, luckily, render template takes another parameter, and this parameter specifies what variable we want to pass over to our HTML file. So I'm going to name this variable message, and I'm going to set this equal to this message variable in here. This is the variable that the front end recognizes, and this is the variable that we're going to have this equal to. So equals to message. Once we're done with that, I can head over to results.html and I want to render this. How will I be able to dynamically render this result? Well, here's where Jinja templating comes into play. Jinja templating allows Flask allows HTML files in Flask to dynamically template results that come from information sent from the backend. So what I'm gonna do is, the way this works is you have double squiggly, and here you specify the name of the variable that you want to render. Here I'm asking to render message, and I'm going to wrap this around an h2 tag to make it pretty bold. All right. And if I head over and try to reload my web application. All right. Well, it's saying I have a syntax error. Well, I can fix that syntax error. Let's see. Well, let's see, is it methods or method? Yeah, so I made a mistake. This is supposed to be a plural methods, not singular method. And if I ask for the user to enter their age, let's say 18, for example, it's saying you're eligible to vote. Go register now. What if I go back and I say the user is 16? It can only concatenate strings to strings. So this is probably a concatenation problem. So what I'm going to do is go back and I'm going to make this a little cleaner. I'm going to save the difference into a variable. So I'm going to make to set years left equal to 18 minus age. And I'm going to change this. So I have years left. And oh, right. The reason why it's spitting that error is because in Python, in order to concatenate integers with strings, what we did was we changed it to int so we could do this, we could do the logic inside this vote eligibility determiner function. But in order to render it as a part of the string, we have to switch this back into a string. And we do that by saying str of this. So if I save that and I reload, I press 16 and it's saying sorry, not eligible. You have 2 years left to wait in order to be eligible. So great. This is basically how it's like to develop a basic web application in Flask. Here I've showed you how to define your routes, how to template what you got from your backend back into the front end by using double squiggly brackets, and also the important modules that we needed in order to handle GET requests and POST requests and rendering HTML files. And finally, how to create models where we develop backend logic and we import that function into app.py so that we can do the rest of the manipulation and the rendering that we need to do. So I hope that you found this tutorial useful. If you really enjoyed this tutorial, please give us a like and also subscribe to our channel if you haven't subscribed yet. And thanks for watching.